everyone. A very good afternoon from Singapore. And to those that joined us from Europe, a very good morning to you. So thank you for joining us for our virtual event today on Decrypting Disruptive Tech and their implications, hosted by the Singapore Global Network, SG Innovate, as well as IMD Business School. I'm Jessie, Regional Lead for Continental Europe with the Singapore Global Network, and I will be the host for today's session. So a quick introduction of SGN before we begin proper. We are part of the Singapore Economic Development Board that engages with our global community of overseas Singaporeans, expats living in Singapore, as well as friends of the city-state. So at SGN, we are here to foster connection between members of our community and to bridge our community to news and opportunities in Singapore and the wider Southeast Asia. So before diving into today's event, there are some house rules to note so that we can make this event a successful and fruitful session for everyone. So please do respect our speakers and other participants while they are speaking. So ensure that your microphone remains muted for the duration of the event. We will be muting your microphone should there be any disturbances. So at the bottom of the screen, you also have the Q&A function. So we would love to hear your questions and also see which questions your peers you might want them to be answered. And due to overwhelming interest, we might not be able to take everyone's questions today, but we'll try to address the top few voted ones. Also wanted to let you know that this event is being recorded and will be made available in the coming weeks. So stay tuned to our SGN YouTube channel if you would like to replay today's session or to send it to your friends. So for today's event, we will begin with a sharing by Emma from Longhash Ventures, followed by a panel discussion from our speakers across Europe and Asia. And then lastly, a Q&A where you'll get a chance to ask your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Emma Tsui, founding partner and CEO of Longhash Ventures, who will share about Web3, the next stage of the internet. Emma, please.
Thank you, Jessie, and great honor to be here today. I'm really excited to share my journey in Web3 and also help to kind of spread some of the insights or help to debunk some of the myths or questions you guys might have with regarding to what is Web3. If I can just quickly share my screen to show you what I want to cover is what is Web3? Why do people think it's the next stage of the internet? Before that, I want to quickly introduce myself and Longhash Venture. So I'm the founding partner and CEO of Longhash Venture. We founded Longhash in 2018 together with my partner Shikai. I met Shikai during our time at McKinsey when we are helping financial institutions in Southeast Asia to launch digital attacker business. Before McKinsey, I was a banker for many years, working for coincidentally Australian banks, Macquarie and ANZ. And before that, I had engineering degree. So, and what is Longhash Venture? So ever since 2018, we are the first Web3 focused accelerator based in Singapore. Over the years, we managed to accelerate more than 50 Web3 startups, help them accessing more than 100 million funds. We've also set up a vertical focused VC fund. Last year, we launched our first fund to focus on DeFi. And this year, we're setting up, we're currently fundraising for our second fund, which will have a broader focus covering DeFi, NFT, GameFi, Metaverse. So why Web3? How did we go down the rabbit hole? I think firstly, I want to kind of quickly clarify the definition of Web3. To understand what is Web3, you first have to understand what is Web 1 and Web 2. So Web 1 is really the first generation of internet applications, right? Think of Google, Yahoo, MSN, explorers, where you're able to search for information, you're able to read, but you really can't really do much with that. And the Web 2 generation 2, which is Web 2, are a lot of the social applications, right? Or gig economy, sharing economy, such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And for this generation of applications, users are able to write and spread that kind of content in a kind of democratic way. But there are problems with Web2 as well. I'm sure you read about centralized platforms controlling user data, and they're monetizing user data through advertising. There's many problems, leak of user data, privacy concerns. And it's in the backdrop of all that, Web3 emerges with the onset of distributed ledger and cryptography. So for the first time, people are trying to attempt to re-architecture internet from very bottom up all the way to applications. And these applications are supposed to be permissionless, are supposed to be the owning source of truth to get rid of the middleman, and are able to kind of let the users take back the controls of their data. Examples would be, if you guys have been, some of you might have interacted with Brave browser. So you're able to turn off the ads. And if you decided to turn on the ads, you will be rewarded. Your attention will be rewarded with Brave token. Or if some of you have interacted with MetaMask, which is probably one of the most popular Web3 wallet, that you're able to self-custody cryptocurrency, and you're able to use MetaMask because in a way like a Web3 native login to interact with various Web3 applications. And of course, we're in super early stage, but broadly speaking, Web3 is where users are given the opportunity to own the data and asset. So what is the Web3 opportunity? Obviously, we're in the very early stage of this journey, right? Bitcoin was invented in 2008. And after that, you have, Ethereum, which is a decentralized computing. You have various Ethereum killers, which are claimed to be more scalable and secure. But still, it's super clunky, right? Think of internet back in the dial-in modem days, and we're probably at that stage for Web3. So everyone in the Web3 space who are building everything across the whole stack, right? They're building the protocols, they're building the infrastructure, they're building the various applications trying to solve for problems in gaming, in finance, in social, in digital rights, but they're also trying to solve for things that can help to make that experience a lot more smooth and painless. So I think over the last, if you look at the last few cycles, right? So during 2017 and 2018, there's no workable applications. Nobody can really interact with the Web3 projects. What you have is basically Ethereum and Bitcoin, right? You're able to transfer tokens back and forth, but that's about it. And in the last 2 years, we've had a breakout of use case in decentralized finance, in non-fungible token, in Metaverse, in gaming, right? Even though it's still very clunky, but for the first time in history, people are able to interact with Web3. So for us, we see opportunities across the entire stack and across the key verticals that are breaking out right now. Maybe just to give you a sense of the scale and also the pace of growth in this space. So in early 2020, I've written an article that was published on Business Times. It's called The Digital Banks as We Know It Might Already Be Obsolete. So I was basically referring to this set of smart contract enabled financial service applications. And back then, the total value logged in that system was about 1 billion. And today, I think last year at its peak, the TVL has grown to more than 200 billion, even though today, if you're watching the markets, you probably noticed there's a massive correction happening in the cryptocurrency market. But still, DeFi, I just checked before this panel, is probably hovering around 115 billion. So that's about 150 times growth within a short 2 years, just to put things into perspective. And also the NFT trading volume, the total NFT market cap for the blue chip NFTs is probably around 5 to 6 billion. So this space and MetaMask monthly active users have reached more than 21 million in late 2021. So all these stats are pointing to increased adoption in the Web3 space. And you also probably hear stories where I think one of the biggest ones, Facebook changed their name to Meta to focus on Metaverse. A lot of the traditional brands like Adidas, Nike starts to develop their Metaverse strategies and also NFT strategies. So I just want to kind dive a bit deeper into some of the key verticals. I think DeFi is decentralized finance. What is decentralized finance? It's basically a set of smart contract enabled financial applications that are emulating the functions in the traditional space. Say you use NASDAQ to trade your tech stocks. You use Fidelity to do your asset management, or UOB. So there's various this type of centralized platform services are being emulated through smart contract. So the largest decentralized exchange is called Uniswap. The largest, one of the most popular decentralized stablecoin is done by Maker, and also one of the most popular lending protocol is called Compound. So all of these applications have made a lot of progress. I'm not gonna lie, we're in super early stage, right? So some of those protocols could, as you probably witnessed what's happening to Luna and UST today, right? $1 billion projects could falter within a very short period of time, just because we're in a very rapid kind of test and rapid fail stage. But for the first time, you have a technology-enabled financial application that doesn't need to go through any centralized platform. So to me, that represents a new paradigm shift. And the next big category of applications for Web3 is non-fungible token. So why is non-fungible token so popular, right? I think you're probably able to find a relevant use case for non-fungible token because you're able to record digital piece of data or assets, and you're able to trace it in distributed ledger, and that has never been done before. So we've all kind of, heard of stories where the famous digital artist Beeple, he was struggling for, I think, 10 years. He was selling his digital arts for maybe like $100 to $1,000 range before NFT was invented. And he sold his NFT piece at a Christie auction, I think last year. I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's around $200 million, just because somebody else can use this technology to verify this is a real piece come from Beeple, and that establishment of authenticity is able to allow a digital piece of art to be traded uniquely and to fetch a very high price. But I think this is a very superficial use case of NFT. We can potentially apply this to ownership of assets in real life, such as real estate. We can apply it to gamify items, right? You probably had, if you're a gamer, you probably had experiences that, you spend all these hours and money and trying to build up your inventory of accessories or weapons. And if the gaming company decides to change the game, right, or decides to shut it down, and all of those things are worthless. Right. So that there was actually a famous story of why Vitalik, the creators of Ethereum, was incentivized to create Ethereum, related to he was playing a game and the game was basically taken away and he was devastated. He thought there should be a way for digital property rights to be recorded somewhere. And of course, you can apply this to music NFT, right? So music NFT allow creators to issue a piece of music and distributed that to the fans directly and engage them constantly, and also potentially cut out the middleman, which is Spotify, the publishing house and whatnot. So there's many use cases, and you probably heard about stories of Sandbox and Metaverse, which we can go in a bit deeper after GameFi. So last year, there's a game called Axie that has really kind of caught the world by storm. It was in the middle of the COVID. A lot of the kind of developing country workers lost their jobs. So they resort to a project called Axie to earn in-game tokens to make their living. So the mechanism is basically you're able to buy the digital pets within this game called Axie, and you're able to use this Axie to play various PvP or PvE games, and in order to earn token. And that has taken the world by storm. So last year, there's by looking at those stats, there's a lot of venture funds that has poured into GameFi, because a lot of the problems gamers used to face were solved with Web3 technology, mostly related to the authenticity of digital piece, right? In-game items and the potential of monetizing those in-game items. And lastly, I want to touch on Metaverse. I think Metaverse is a very ambiguous term. Nobody knows. Everybody's talking about Metaverse. Everybody's excited about Metaverse, but there's no accurate definition of Metaverse. So for me personally, I think we are already spending a lot of time in Metaverse, right? Because this is the kind of like a new virtual space where you work, you social, right? Even if the technology today are still clunky and primitive, but we already spent way more time online compared to in the physical world, right? So some of the popular projects in the metaverse space are still kind of banking on using Web3 technology to establish ownership of digital items, I think, and to allow for frictionless transaction of items in a peer-to-peer way. So I think the underlying mechanism enabled by Web3 stays pretty consistent, whether it's NFT or metaverse use case. And you probably heard about stories where Yuga Labs raised 500 million from A16Z, and they're able to sell those profile pictures of bored apes. So there's a lot of, I think all these things are exciting. And there's a lot of hype around those things. I'm not saying the price point is well justified, because that's for, I think, the market to find out over time. But I think in the first time in history, there's a technology that's able to allow you to establish some sort of ownership over a digital item and allow you to transact that in a permissionless way. And to me, that's a fundamental paradigm shift, and that shows huge potential for Web3. I do have this video of Sandbox, but I think it's probably technically quite challenging to play that, and we're running short of time. So I'm just going to jump to the last slide, which is adoption cycle. Because since Bitcoin was created, we've seen multiple cycles of boom and bust, right? Every time when there's a bust happening, people will be asking, is this a scam? Is this, is this purely hype? But every time after 2-3 years, you see another uptick of adoption because of new generation of applications, new generations of potentially usable use cases that come alive. So it's anybody's guess where we are in the adoption cycle, just like any new technology. When it was invented, even when internet was invented, it also went through this level of, if you're familiar with Gartner's cycle in terms of adoption. So I think it's no difference for Web3 technology, distributed ledger. We might go through corrections or market crash as time goes, but I think the future for Web3 is as bright as ever. And with that note, I'm going to end my short presentation and pass the mic back to our host. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Emma, for that very insightful presentation. I think it really set the stage for our panel discussion, where we will dive deeper into blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and NFTs. So to begin, I would like to introduce our moderator for our panel discussion, Dr. Patrick Reimoller, who is the Professor of Strategy and Innovation at IMD Business School. So Patrick, please.
Thank you very much, Jesse. That is absolutely fantastic. I'm delighted to be with you today. This is an exciting time to be discussing the things that Emma has introduced so lucidly. And I don't want to take much of the time to introduce the splendid panelists that we have here. I just want to immediately ask Pascal Berclaz, who is the CEO and founder of a company that is called Quinting, and that apparently should not be part of the panel, because this is a watchmaker in Switzerland. And after all these exciting things that Emma has been pointing towards, which were cutting-edge technology with ledger, backed up by ledger technology, all these exciting things, should they have anything to do with the traditional arts and crafts of making a watch? What does traditional watchmaking have to do with digital technologies such as NFTs and Ledger that Emma has just introduced? That is my question to Pascal, who will come on in a minute. And right after Pascal has then elaborated on why he is interested and fascinated by the things that you are fascinated in, I will then hand over and ask a question to our third panelist, which is Julian So, who is the group CEO of Xtreme Business Enterprises, a company that specializes in disruptive technology. But more on this by Julian after Pascal has explained us why the old world and the new world come together in the watchmaking industry. Pascal, would you mind elaborating on what fascinates you about digital technologies as you are with the analog?
Thank you very much for this introduction. And perhaps you can try to, we have the theory before, and then we try to see you welcome in the world of Quinting. Perhaps a short introduction about myself. I am engineer in research and development in electrotechnique, and at the same time I am economist. And I worked during some year in the research and development in ABB, and then I start to work for some banks in Switzerland. Very fast, I start to buy some company for myself. And the first company was a company in informatics. And directly in this company, I use a new technology, disruptive, not new technology. What is it? Disruptive. Something they change. One part you have the product, and the other it's a market. How we can use a disruptive technology to put the market and the product together. First, it was a train. With a train, we change. We can take a product and more fast, without cost, we can deliver to the market. And what I did with Quinting. With Quinting, I use a descriptive technology. First, when you drive a plan, you need to put the plan in a letter, you send the letter to one company to produce. But if you use internet, you can send the plan directly to the companies, to the supplier. This it was the first part. And what I changed completely with Quinting, to produce a watch 100% see-through. Just show you the watch. You see, the watch is 100% see-through. This it was the dream of all watchmakers in Switzerland. And what we do with Quinting? We do like this. You have an engine, a machine, and the tools. Usually, all the company buy engine and the tool. What we do? We use internet to find the best engine around the world that it's possible to find, military or a company, they are very, very crazy engine around the world, and we develop the tools. This it was the first. First, we can send the plan, but when we start 20 years ago, this company, I start to drive the engine in Germany, in USA, in Japan, directly with my computer. We send the tools, it's a very small tool to cut one part, and I drive the engine directly. It's why in Switzerland, some journalists wrote, it's impossible to create a watch is 100% see-through. Only the engineer of Quinting didn't know that, because it was done. And after, if you are a manufacturer in Switzerland, you need to have the big engine inside the company. And some friend of me told me, Pascal, you are not a manufacturer because you don't have engine inside the manufacturer. We say, okay, we are magicians because we don't buy movement. You know, you need to have a movement inside the watch, and we sell movement to some other company. We sold some movement to Christian Dior or some company like this. And this is completely to use the disruptive technology. And know why I am completely crazy about NFT about Metaverse, because we have some watches. I will show you one watch is like this. This is a, you see, yes, this is the first real moonlight you can find around the world because it's a see-through. We produce watches like this, 360. We sold these watches. But what we do more now we create NFT just for the moon. Just for the moon, we create 8 watches, virtual watches. And you have the real watches, and at the same time, you have a virtual watches with NFT. And this it's possible to do too. And more than that, we have one watches with, because it's a completely see-through, behind the watches you can see the man behind the watch, and it's this man is more important. That's the time. We create some special watches with a concept. We put in the watch 2 doors, one door running at the speed of the minute, the other door at the speed of the hours, and only 1 minute per hour. You can see only one door. To symbolize, we need fighting for 59 minutes for 1 minute piece. We create these watches in limited edition, 193, because there are 193 countries belong the United Nations. To symbolize, we need the democracy to build the peace. But more than that, through the land, through the door, it's possible to see the mind behind the watch. Is this man the builder of the peace around the world? And with that, we have Bill Clinton, Kofi Annan, the president from Switzerland, Berlusconi, Putin too. They wear these watches. But more than that, no, with these watches, we create virtual watches exactly the same. With this finance, we will sell that. We start to sell. With this finance, we can create a university for peace in Switzerland. I speak very fast, but it's completely new. First, with a disruptive technology, we can create a revolution in Switzerland in the watch business. Not only because we produce a movement 100% see-through, but we are completely manufactured. In Switzerland, there are 2,000 brand name in watches, but only 25 we produce the movement. And Quinting, it's a company, we produce movement. And now we start to produce movement with virtual watches, but completely. When you look the time is not virtual. If you look on your telephone or if you look in the watches, it's the same finally. It's why we continue to produce virtual watches. And it's very interesting. Before we are speaking about Metaverse. And when you do a plan, it's Metaverse. When you use, when I am in Dubai, I fly to Geneva to Dubai. My opinion, it's Metaverse too when I am in the plan, because I am not a bird, I don't fly, And we create the University of Peace. We will give the course in Geneva. We can give the course with Zoom, like we are today. And now we start to develop in the Metaverse too. But for me, it's only a reality.
Thank you very much, Pascal. This is great. I thought you were to ground us in something tangible only, something analog only, but you have created an even bigger perspective on what the metaverse and the digital disruptive technologies can do for us. You've stretched it to Peace University as well. But I want to go back to what Anna has been showing us. She is showing us the enormous development of NFTs, the enormous development based on ledger technology that we have seen. She has shown us that on the hype cycle, we seem to be peaking. We know that the first tweet that Jack Dorsey sold for millions recently couldn't fetch 14,000, more than 14,000 on an auction, so it wasn't sold. So we seem to be somewhere at the pivotal moment. And you say, well, we independent of this hype, we are using exclusive technology to authenticate the watches that we sell in the real world, but we also offer virtual watches. So whether this hype is coming down or not, you are trying to use this technology to add much value to your users. The question, though, that I would like to ask Julian is authentication. The NFTs, the ledger technology, to what extent is it actually possible to do what Emma suggested, that we own for the first time in history digital assets? To what extent are we now able to say, I have bought this online and I have it in my digital wallet that is hosted by someone, and I have the IP of my NFT? What does that actually mean? Julian, can you help us?
Sure. So let me just very briefly introduce myself and my company first. I'm actually the group CEO of XB.com, so Xtreme Business Enterprises. And we are actually a group that is very, very focused about trying to apply, what I call the Web3 technology to existing real world industries, and to steer away from all of the hype and speculation that's happening around the JPEGs and a lot of the digital assets. Okay. Now, coming back to your question, Patrick, when the NFT technology and the blockchain technology is actually a very, very useful technology. We actually take an interest to ensure that this technology would have a long-term prospect in our world, right? And the only way to do it is to ensure that we can clearly articulate to the rest of the world what is the purpose of this technology and how can we use it to improve our lives and to change the way we operate and to change the way we run our businesses. Right? As long as we continue to stick, with flipping JPEGs, we will never be able to get to that point. And it's the reason why we took it upon ourselves as a group to avoid all of that, to really resist all that temptation, because there's so much money to be made there. But instead, we really focused on how to apply it. And honestly, today, we believe that we are probably one of the most advanced companies in the world in terms of application. Not the technology itself. We rely on the rocket scientists to build all the protocols and to build a blockchain. But what we want to do is we want to pick the best one for our own use. Okay. Now, so how have we actually applied NFT technology? Now, if you ask us, the NFT essentially is really more of a tool than an end product. Right now, when people talk about NFTs, they talk about it as if it is an end product. For example, in all of the JPEG NFTs, they show you the image when you buy the NFT. Okay, so again, most buyers, when they buy the NFT, they think that they are buying the image. And as you correctly pointed out, Patrick, how do you buy a digital image? In the real world? I mean, in the virtual world, that's a separate issue, but in the real world, how do you ensure that you have a legally binding ownership title over a digital image? And actually, in reality, the only way you could do it is to actually secure some kind of intellectual property, ownership or license or rights over that image. Then only you can actually say that you own or you actually possess something in that digital image. Now, in most of the NFTs, JPEG NFTs that we see today, what the buyer actually receives is really merely the token. And to us, the token is really nothing more than a very, very advanced Word document, right? Because what you need to do is you need to write things into that document to determine what you have actually bought. And the funny thing is that if you look at the metadata of a lot of NFTs today, you see a web address written on it. Now, the web address written on an NFT doesn't actually give you any kind of rights over the digital image. And I think that's a problem that, we need to solve today. And for us, what we have done is we've actually used NFT technology to create, our own proprietary, what we call a DOT, a digital ownership token. What it means is that we have actually written exactly what I've just mentioned. As far as digital assets are concerned, or what we call intangible assets are concerned, we make sure that the intellectual property ownership document, or the intellectual property license, or the intellectual property contractual rights are actually written into the metadata of the NFT to ensure that it is a legally binding asset that is recognized by the courts, recognized by the law, that you actually own something. And that's what we've done with the DOT. And every single DOT that you buy from our group will have such legally binding documentation. Okay, and why do I emphasize that it must be in the metadata? Because right now, if you look at some of the NFTs out there, they have a separate license agreement that's separate from the NFT, right? And in a lot of cases, it's just terms and conditions on a website. And that is again problematic because you have concern about, privity of contract. Are you a party to the contract? Are those obligations binding? And in fact, if you look at a lot of terms and conditions on the website, they're usually subject to change by the website owner. Again, that creates a lot of problems when you're actually trying to deal with NFTs. And again, that was just all on the digital assets. But, as Pascal has just very, very passionately talked about, his physical luxury watches, what we have seen is that, look, right now, as far as we're concerned, only 5% of the total population of the world is actually involved in the crypto space. What we as a group is trying to do is we're trying to draw the other 95% to come in and actually look at this technology and apply it to their businesses, to their real world business. And Pascal is just one very good example. And today, if you think about it, when you buy luxury watches, it's great, you have it on your hand, but how do you know you own it? There are a lot of assets in our world today that do not actually have a government-controlled central registry, like a land registry, where you have a title deed that tells you that you own that piece of land. Okay, we don't have the same thing for watches, and that's why blockchain is great. It's a distributed ledger, like you correctly mentioned, Patrick, where we can finally create a register for these assets and actually produce a title deed to those physical assets. And the way we do it is to ensure that we put all the necessary documentation of the watch, which is, for example, the ownership title, the agreement, maybe the warranty, the authentication, the verification documentation. We put all of that into the metadata of the NFT. Okay, and then the next step is this, which is again something I find very, very interesting. We buy NFTs because it is supposed to be on the blockchain. It's supposed to be immutable. It's supposed to be decentralized. It's all of these benefits of the blockchain. But interestingly, I've actually found, and I'm not responsible for these statistics, but I took these statistics off a publication that's sent to me on a weekly basis. It's called the Milk Road. And they have done an analysis, and they have came to the conclusion that up to 1/3 of all of the NFTs in the top 100 Ethereum NFTs that are actually being sold on OpenSea, the metadata of those NFTs are actually stored on a centralized server. Again, that's ridiculous, right? Because the reason why you buy an NFT, because you want it to be decentralized, you want to be protected. And then the metadata, which contains the most important things about what you're buying, is on a centralized server. And the person who owns the server can actually cancel it, can actually amend it, can actually change it at any point in time. So where is that protection? And that's the reason why we keep emphasizing, when you buy an NFT, first of all, you need to know what you're buying. What is it that you want to get when you pay that money? Right? Someone has paid $23.7 million for a CryptoPunk. And funnily enough, he didn't actually get the intellectual property to the image. All he got was a web link. Again, mind-boggling. Obviously, now it's going to start to change because it's been bought over by Yuga Labs, and they're talking about trying to give some of these licenses to those NFT holders. But still, it is a problem. And I think we need to try and solve it. And we are very, very keen to use these Web3 technologies applied to real-world businesses, solve real-world solutions, find real-world solutions for real-world problems, so that we can improve productivity, efficiency, and hopefully just improve everyone's lives. And I hope that's a brief introduction to what I just wanted to say, and as an answer to your question, Patrick. Thank you.
It's great to see that you are all very, very passionate about this subject area, and it's amazing what we have already been doing together. We have been extending from a massive hype that actually is relevant only for 2% of the population on the planet. We have talked about the purely digital financial transaction, but we also have grounded it in analog products that seem to be benefiting from a link to the digital technologies. And I think this is a massive field that we need to get our head around. And I'm curious how Emma thinks about this linking up this NFT technology blockchain to secure the authenticity of physically existing products. That seems to say, I'm a bit provocative here, that in order to make this useful, we first need to figure out what this all means, how we can ensure intellectual property right, but then it is only useful if it is tied to some physical asset. And that seemed to go a bit against what Emma has been suggesting earlier, that there is a massive potential to generate returns, fun, profitability, entertainment in a metaverse that is totally unrelated to physically existing products or as states. Emma, how do you think about this?
No, I'm glad you asked. And first of all, I think I agree with a lot of the problems that Julian has rightly pointed out, given we're so early. And I don't think the technology, there is a very good standards around an NFT IP issuance, right? But the technology is the good technology, and the technology is the innovation that allows for digital authenticity to be established, right? And now we need to figure out what would be the standard, right? Now we need to figure out how do we incorporate the real useful data, authenticity data into the metadata, as Julian rightly pointed out, right? We also have to figure out this everything related to this, whether it's the metadata or the stored information needs to be stored in truly decentralized storage, not on Amazon, right? Because then that's not truly decentralized. They can change the centralized database. So that kind of points out to what I was referring to as the Web3 opportunity. It's not just in the applications, right? The builders are building, trying to build across all the stack, decentralized storage, making sure there's better standards around in the market, right? So the retail users are not gonna get screwed by buying a piece of NFT where there's no real rights to this or IP attached to this NFT, to make sure they know what they're buying. But now the second point I want to bring up is to address what you mean by you were talking about, should we use NFT to link that to physical object, or are we going to be okay with digital native kind of NFTs, right? Namely CryptoPunks, Bored Apes. In my view, I think there's valid use case in both. Right? If you use NFT to link to real life objects such as a LV bag, right, a piece of luxury jewelry or a watch, it helps to solve for that authenticity and checking problem, right? Which is way more transparent than today's centralized solution. But there's a problem with that, which is the problem of garbage in, garbage out. So who is certifying that and putting that data on chain becomes the critical point. Then you're also trusting somebody else, right? What if that party becomes corrupted? So that's the problem that people need to come up with solution with, right? Somebody needs to verify that information goes on there is actually authenticated. Now, but I definitely think there's valid use case for that. The second part, which I'm very interested in, is, you know, to do with the creator economy, right? Whether a creator is creating a piece of art using physical pen and paper, right? Or they're using that like a photographer producing a piece of original photography, right? Or somebody creating a piece of digital art, that still should speak volumes of the creativity, right, or originality. If there's a way to authenticate that and making sure the buyers know that that's the only piece of digital art out there produced by this artist, then I think there's tremendous value in this piece of work, right? Or they might decide to produce a piece of Bored Apes, as long as you know that only piece, when was it created, what was the transaction history, there's still a lot of value attached to that. So I think there's valid use case for both.
Thank you. That is really, really helpful. I think the link to the creative economy is particularly fascinating because for artists, the opportunity to benefit a bit from every single sale and resale of the original piece of art that you've created is an opportunity that they never had. In the past, physical art objects were sold once, for example, to a gallery, and then the artist would not necessarily benefit from the additional sale of the same object going forward. And I think for the creators, this is a fantastic opportunity. And I also really appreciate how we are all seemingly in agreement of this being an area of ferment, where a lot of things are going on. No one really has the crystal ball here. No one knows how the future of NFTs and blockchain is going to look like. So there is a lot of experimentation going on. Simultaneously, we are massively experimenting in a space that no one really owns yet. And that means that there will be some winners, and we have seen some in the past already, and there may be some that don't make it into the next decade. So I think that's very fair to acknowledge. But to the specific point that you mentioned, the link between analog objects and the digital world, I wanted to ask Pascal to share with us briefly his view on how he and Quinting thinks about selling digital objects only. So do you see, Pascal, do you see a future for only digital Quinting objects?
Perhaps we can explain very, very simple. When I sell Quinting watches, physical Quinting watches or virtual Quinting watches, what is important? It's a brand name Quinting, and it's virtual. The brand, it's not possible to touch the brand. And we have some convention. You have to register the brand name. Before it was very, very expensive. Minimum $500,000 to protect the brand in each country, not around the world completely, but main country. After that, there are OMPI, it's in Geneva, where Madonna sing something, she does the registration in Geneva. The brand is the same. We do the registration, but it's a cost. And the cost, it's important. Only if you are the company, you can pay that. And if we look, if you have a virtual, something virtual, you buy one virtual thing. What is difficult today, it's to do the registration in one organism that every country say, okay, if this organism do the registration for Quinting, I am the owner of the brand Quinting. It's exactly the same if it's only one small thing. And the problem is not the NFT, because when you have the NFT, who can say you are the owner of this NFT? If in Geneva we have a convention, this convention exists. And we just need to put the link, the technology link, that this organism in Geneva do the registration. And that's it. But the technology, it's there. It's done. We just need, each country need to say, okay, we agree with it, like we agree for the brand name. It's why I say I have no problem, because I have the brand name Quinting. I have, for Quinting, I have the registration. I can sell one NFT, and I am sure if I sell one NFT, the owner of the NFT, he is protected, because he has two protections. He has a protection with the NFT, with the blockchain and the wallet and so on. But this is not a protection at all. Because if I want to protect you, if something duplicates, who can say something today? Nobody can say something. Okay, duplicate, you say, no, it's mine. The other person say, oh, it's mine too. And after, what you can do? Nothing. You need to have one organization. This says, no, it's Mr. X, the owner. And no, if you live in Singapore, okay, the government Singapore send to you the police. You need to be very concrete. But the solution is it's done.
Thank you, Pascal. This is very, very helpful. What I think is emerging is that we have technology that's super advanced, but we still need to figure out how we can legally catch up with clarity and transparency about who owns the intellectual property. And when I talk about intellectual property, or intellectual insight, I'm actually talking about the cues that you have sent in, the questions that you have sent in, participants all around the world. Thank you for this. And I could never handle the amount of brilliant questions alone. So that's why you have seen pop up on the screen my colleague, Professor Carl Schmetters, a partner in crime when we write about NFTs, but also the leader when it comes to finance at IND. He's going to handle the questions. Carl, what is the most exciting question according to you?
There are a bunch of exciting questions. I already apologize in advance. We can't do justice to all of them. Let's start perhaps with questions for Julian. What is currently the state of the art of legal frameworks for ownership with NFTs in the different jurisdictions where you do business? Do you have sort of a bit of an overview? There's also a concern, how far can we go with authenticity on an NFT? At which point have we done enough due diligence? And maybe related to all of this, some people consider the hype to be harmful, to be outright dangerous. And maybe that's the question also then for Emma. Where's the difference between there's so much rubbish, people are afraid to fall for cheating, for criminal activities versus the legal activities. Can you help us sorting out this? And how can we prevent the whole great idea to be hijacked or polluted by rubbish? Perhaps first, Julian, on the legal issue, and then Emma on sort of the content. Thank you, please.
Sure. Thanks, Carl. Look, we as a group, we're headquartered in Singapore, so obviously we follow very closely Singapore law and regulations. We are actually some of our subsidiaries are listed in the US, so we actually work with the US regulators on a long-term basis, and we have to deal with a lot of their concerns there as well. And obviously, our research and development is out of Hong Kong, so we also pay very careful attention to Hong Kong laws. I mean, lucky for me, I was actually a qualified lawyer in Hong Kong, Singapore, and the UK. So at least for most of the Commonwealth countries, I'm actually pretty comfortable. With the US, I'm actually learning something new all day long. They have a pretty different regime and pretty complex as well to look at. Now, from my perspective, a lot of people tend to think that the traditional ordinary laws and regulations do not apply to things like NFTs because they're supposedly virtual assets. But that's actually entirely not true. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I look at the NFT, and to me, it is really just a very advanced Word document. And what you write on it will determine what kind of rights you have. And the existing laws that we have today will apply to the NFT depending on what it's supposed to represent, right? So as I mentioned earlier, if you have a Word document and the only thing you write on it is a web link, then obviously you have nothing. You have not protected in any way whatsoever, because there's no protection for a web link, right? But what we do is this: we ensure that in the metadata of the NFT, it actually contains legally binding documentation. And Carl, I think you asked a very, very good question earlier, right? So let's say, for example, if you talk about a particular art piece, right? And like you mentioned, we're concerned about how much due diligence you have to do before, you can ensure that the provenance is carried throughout into the NFT itself, okay? So what we do is we actually start, for example, by getting a sale and purchase agreement signed by the owner or the creator, okay, of the asset. So let's say, for example, it's a digital image. We make sure that the owner of that intellectual property signs a sale and purchase agreement, okay? And then we have to determine what we're buying, okay? If let's say, for example, we are sure we're actually buying the intellectual property for the image, we make sure that we are actually buying that. He signs off on it, and he has all the regular documentation, all the reps and warranties, ensuring that he has all of the rights to pass on to the NFT holder. Okay, and thereafter, then we actually come with a transfer document that then transfers those rights from the recipient into the holder of the NFT. Now, I think I'm going to get a little bit technical here, right? So, for example, a lot of people have talked about bearer bonds, right? So, bearer bonds exist in a manner where you do not actually have to be a contractual party to the bond to get rights to the bond. It gets passes on to you through possession, and that's how we do. We actually use Singapore law to do exactly that. So we transfer those rights to whoever is actually holding on to the NFT, so that as the NFT gets passed along to different people, they will receive those rights. So that's the amount of effort that we've put in to ensure that this NFT is of value. Okay, and then we go on to what I mentioned earlier, which is then we ensure that the metadata, right, is then being stored not on a centralized server, but on the blockchain. Look, but then there's also another problem. Everyone claims that they have the most wonderful blockchain in the world. As Emma mentioned earlier, we're still in the very early days. How do we know that these blockchains are going to be around in the near future? Right? And look, again, it's true. We wouldn't know, but at the very least, from our due diligence, for example, and I think Emma has it in the PowerPoint earlier, we have chosen Arweave to put our metadata on the blockchain. And why? Because Arweave actually comes with an insurance to ensure that all the metadata that's on their blockchain will be there for 200 years. Now, again, this demonstrates the amount of work that we do to ensure that every NFT, or we call it a DOT, that comes out and is being produced by us will have all of that properly done, so that the person who buys it is properly protected. So I hope that actually answers the question. There's actually many different layers. In order to really go through the entire explanation, I think we would actually have to do a 1-hour session, and I have to get through every single piece. But I'll try not to do that, so that I can pass the mic over to Emma for her part of it. But thank you, Carl, for the question.
Thank you very, very much, Julian. The thank you goes to the audience. Emma, how do you distinguish rubbish from substance on the surface?
That's a really good question. That's a $1 billion question. I think I mean, by the nature of business, we're in VC investment, right? Which means we have to take risk, and we're in the business of finding gems among, noises. I think what we are very bullish on is the paradigm shift enabled by Web3, distributed ledger, and its potential use cases across all the key industry. Now, the problem is we need to find credible teams who has unwavering commitments to build and not just kind of being opportunistic and take the money and run, right? Because I think as with any innovation, there is there's a lot of noise, right? If you think back to, stock market, stock was invented as an instrument to gain access to finance. There's also, wild market swings to penny stock manipulation, right? Because the regulations were getting more and more mature and investors are getting more educated and sophisticated. I think we're going through that for the Web3 industry, because the regulations are catching up and getting harmonized across different regulators, right? And then secondly is the industry, the technology is becoming more mature as people understand what are the limitations, what are the potentials, but it's definitely a journey. And the third thing is with the founders coming to the space, as time goes, everyone will start to build a reputation, right? Like today, when you build a Web2 startup, people are gonna say, are you from Google? Are you from Facebook? Are you from Y Combinator? Those type of things will start to add credential, right? I think as time goes in Web3, the Web3 reputation and credentials will start to build up as well. And those are the things I think people will start allow investors like us, whether it's institutional investor or retail investor, to have a better judgment in terms of what are the projects they should back, right? I think one of the advantages and also disadvantages of Web3 is the existence of cryptocurrency, which is very liquid and a very early stage, right? And there are thousands of them. So there's a lot of information that's very hard to kind of distinguish. So I would definitely encourage any retail investors to do your research as much as possible, right? Go to the Discord channels, try to find opportunities to follow the founders, understand their background. If you do your research, you will find a lot of the founders in the space projects are very, very accessible because Web3 is designed to be permissionless and transparent, right? And you have to use that to do your research and understand what you're getting into. But of course, we all learn along this journey.
Thank you very much for the advice, Emma. If I can take it a step further, there's a question for entrepreneurs who want to get into the space, in particular in decentralized finance, but also more generally. What homework do they need to do? You already started going in that direction. What do you see as sort of the main barriers to entry that that entrepreneurs must overcome?
I feel there is no barriers of entry. You can join because you can either, I'm just trying to put it as bigger categories, right? You can join as investor, you can join a project, you can join as service provider, right? So there's multiple ways to join the industry. Or if you don't want to go full time, you can actually be part of decentralized autonomous organizations, right? DAOs. And DAOs involvement is very much like gig economy. You come in, try to contribute, right? And everyone's learning around this journey, right? There's no better way to learn than through yourself into the midst of it, right? And try to, because even for us who has been in the space for a couple of years, is we're learning every day. It's like there's a Cambrian explosion of knowledge. And it's hard to keep up, but if you put yourself inside this and try to learn and try to network, that's the only way.
Thank you, Emma. I think I will take a break. I have more questions, but back to you, Patrick, if you...
Let me just ask one question. We have been talking mainly about NFTs and how to make sure that we get what we think we get. And so when we talk about NFTs, that is only a small portion of what will eventually become the metaverse, where we are in a digital space and we are supposed to be able to buy and sell digital assets in this digital space. My question to the expert panel now is, if we have sorted eventually the question of who owns the intellectual property about the NFT, what is the challenge going to be when this NFT is being used in a world that is owned by others? Who would like to take this? Julian, would you like to take this first, and then we go back to Emma? Is that good?
I would rather allow Emma to start first, because I'm not sure I actually fully understand the question. So maybe through her answer, I can get a better idea.
Let me just rephrase the question and give Emma a little bit more time. If we know who owns the NFT eventually and how the IP is sorted for the NFT, what about the ownership of an NFT in a world that is owned by others?
I think I understand to a certain extent, but please let me know if my understanding is incorrect. So example would be if I own a piece of CryptoPunk, right? I use that as my Metaverse identity, and I go into, say, Sandbox, which is a Metaverse, and there are other people who bought various pieces of land, right? And maybe on a piece of land that's owned by, I don't know, South China Morning Post, they build a virtual, I don't know, library, and I go in there. I think the NFT was come with certain utility, allow you to do certain things. I don't necessarily think they will actually conflict, because owning a piece of land means you can control what you build on that, and what do you allow people to do in that piece of land? Who are you? What kind of activities can you host, right? By me holding the CryptoPunks as my Metaverse identity, I can use that to express my character, right? So people recognize me by that. So it's not necessarily conflicting. I don't know.
Okay.
That helps to answer the question.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, that helps it. That calms me down a little bit. I was getting nervous that some owner of a Metaverse platform is claiming a percentage of the exchange value that I generate when I sell and buy NFTs in their spaces. But yes, that is very helpful. Thank you. Julian?
Right. Okay. So if I understand the question correctly, based on what you just said, Patrick, it sounds to me like you're saying that even though I already own the NFT, if I use the NFT in somebody else's space, and they decide to actually charge me for using my NFT in their space, is that possible, and is that right? And I think actually, to be honest, the funny thing is this. Everyone again always treats the virtual world as something completely different from the physical world, but it's actually very similar, right? So if, let's say, for example, I own something in the real world and I bring it to my friend's gallery and I tell him that, look, I want to place my item in your gallery, and if he decides that because I'm placing it in his gallery, he's going to charge me rental, of course he's entirely entitled to do that, even though the item belongs to me. So I think a lot of people tend to separate virtual from the real world, but in reality, you can't actually stay away from the real world. And it's the same problem with, for example, the recent legal issue with respect to the Meta Birkins, right? So the guy who created Meta Birkins thinks that, I'm creating a handbag in the virtual world. I'm not flouting any intellectual property in the real world, but that's not true. Why? Because every single piece of digital asset that exists in the virtual world actually exists, or actually has a shadow in the real world in the form of intellectual property. And you can still breach a lot of laws and regulations in the real world, regardless of what you do in the virtual world. And that's something that people need to understand, and people need to recognize and deal with it. And that's how we can actually move forward and try to use this technology for real world purposes. And that's what I keep emphasizing. I hope that answers the question, Patrick.
No, thank you so much, Julian, Emma. This brings so much clarity to a fuzzy question. Thanks a lot. Let's go to Carl and the much clearer and better questions from the audience.
So there's a question, like, in order to get progress, do we need sort of government regulatory involvement or participation, or could it be a ground up that just practitioners eventually get to a gold standard of authentication without having the government involved? sort of, is this sort of a grassroots phenomenon, or do we need sort of the policymaker to come in? So of course that's both from the legal viewpoint, but also sort of from the entrepreneurial viewpoint. So it's really a question again for both of you, Emma and Julian. Ladies first or lawyer first?
Happy to share my perspective. I think over the years of the revolution of Web3, we've already seen it's growing. It started off as a grassroots initiative, but now it's grown to be too big to be ignored by the regulators. And also there's various instances of where certain jurisdiction regulators try to shut it down, but all they end up doing is to push that out, right? Examples being I don't know how many times, and what it propelled entrepreneur and the industry to do is to migrate to a different country that's more crypto friendly. And we've seen kind of crypto companies or entrepreneurs doing this sort of regulatory arbitrage, right? So it's been proven to be very difficult to stamp out due to the nature of permissionless and community driven, but it also has proven to be, there's huge potential. My view is I think regulators should be involved, and they should start proactively engage this industry and harness the technology, right, for good use, right? And I don't fully think all the standards has to be set by the government, right? They should actually consult with the industry participants and understand limitations and what are some of the reasonable trade-offs, and perhaps works in the industry consortium type of way to come up with standards that will be accepted with the good compromise. So that's my view. And I don't think it's possible to stamp it out either. Yeah.
Thank you, Emma. Julian?
Yeah, look, like anything else, if you look through history, it always starts with, the ground up. Entrepreneurs will try to do anything possible. And that's great, because that's the whole purpose of the free market, right? To create new industries, to create new opportunities. But after it's gone to a certain point, and I think we're actually at that point where, we start to see a lot of abuses, and, the governments feel that, the common people needs to be protected. And based on all the things that I've just said earlier and all the problems with, for example, with NFTs I've just mentioned, this is obviously the time when the regulators need to step in to try and regulate, to make sure that these abuses do not happen. Now, I mentioned earlier, about how, as a group, we have to deal with both the Commonwealth, the common law type regime, as well as the US regime. To be honest, let's start with the US regime, right? If you look at Howey's test on securities, the reason why the US hasn't actually started implementing new regulations on virtual assets is because if you apply the Howey test to any of the existing projects, whether they are NFTs or whether or not they are cryptocurrencies, as you mentioned, Patrick, earlier, there is a very high likelihood that they will be classified as securities. Okay. In fact, as a matter of course, in all of my, the reason why I keep emphasizing that what we're doing is a DOT, which is a digital ownership token, is because the regulators in the US do not want us to call our product the NFT. Right? Because they know that what we're doing actually represents something in the real world, right? What they're trying to target is really purely virtual assets, people who treat NFT as an end product. And they think that eventually the regulations is going to catch up, because if they actually determine that these projects is some kind of an enterprise that generates some kind of a returns for its investors, then it's going to be classified as a security. Now, as far as the Commonwealth countries are concerned, or the countries that apply common law are concerned, there are actually typically two provisions that we have to be very careful of. One is called a derivative. So anything that's a derivative will be considered a security. Okay. And a derivative just simply means that if you have an asset whose valuation or whose price or whose value is determined by another underlying asset, then it will be classified as a derivative. So in my view, for all of the time that I've spent looking at stable coins, for example, because the value of the coins are tied to the underlying currency, I've always thought that they could be viewed as a security, and that's always a possibility. And different regulators have taken different views. The second provision, the second definition they need to be very careful with on common law is called the CIS, which is a collective investment scheme. So basically what it means is that if people are pooling their money together for someone to manage it in order to generate a return for its investors, that also would be classified as a security. And I think Emma mentioned about the DAO earlier, right? The decentralized autonomous organization. Now that really functions almost like a fund, right? You're pooling money from everybody, and although the decision to make investments is decided by a community or some kind of a democracy within the organization. In my view, there is a very, very high risk that it could be classified as a collective investment scheme, in which case it's also a security. So again, that's the reason why I think anybody that wants to come into the Web 3.0 space need to be very clear and very careful about what they're doing. And look, for all intents and purposes, find a very good lawyer, right, to guide you through what you're doing. I think that's the single largest hurdle for any entrepreneur that wants to get into Web3 today. And that's just my view. I hope that helps. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, Julian. Here's now a question that looks at it completely different. Yeah, I find this fascinating. So we are talking a lot about NFTs or DOTs, sort of what's in the virtual world. Now let's look at the underlying item. So what happens if the underlying item changes? Now, if I own a watch from Pascal, the real watch in the analog world I have on my arm, but the digital watch, then Pascal comes along and tweaks it, and I don't like it anymore. And this question arises in Emma, in your opening presentation. You gave an example how NFTs came out of this game, but sort of having then the game no longer going on or being stored somewhere, that's changing the nature of what I own. So what is this NFT worth? Yeah, and so that this is now, even if there's a beautiful legal setup, if the digital item underneath, whether it's this game or Pascal's digital watch, changes, is that allowed? And what is the value? Maybe this devalues my NFT, even though everything on the NFT side or DOT side is perfectly fine. So what do I own? Yeah, is this set in stone? It could also be, I guess, an artist who later on says, oh, I don't like my rabbit anymore. I wanted bigger ears or no ear or only one ear. So how do you view that? Emma, Julian, Pascal.
Julian, do you
Pascal, you are. Go ahead, Emma. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to take that question. Thanks, Carl. Look, Carl, as I mentioned earlier, when you buy an NFT and you've actually done the proper due diligence before you buy it, as I mentioned earlier, you would have gotten the intellectual property of that digital image in its original form. Okay, that is in your metadata. You would also have received the image in its original form also in your metadata, right? And that image now belongs to you. Okay, now, and assuming that you have the full intellectual property rights to it. Now, if let's say, for example, given the example that you've just given, if I bought a digital twin of one of Pascal's watches, that image, and assuming he has transferred the intellectual property of the image to me, that image now belongs to me. If Pascal actually makes any modifications to that image on his end, it doesn't actually affect what I've bought, because what I've bought is still with me. Okay. However, there's another intellectual property question, which is that if Pascal had transferred to me the full intellectual property rights to that image, and he's making modifications to that image, then he's actually doing a derivative of the IP that I own. And then the question is whether or not he's entitled to do that. So, if I were Pascal's lawyer, what I would give away, for example, and that's what we've always been advising Pascal, is that he would be giving to you the full non-exclusive private and commercial license to use that image in however manner you want to, so that Pascal ultimately still keeps the original intellectual property, so that he can take that watch and makes modifications to it in the future and issue new NFTs on the new amended image, but he would have given me that image, the original image, both the private and the commercial use rights, so that I can do whatever I want with it. So that's how you should look at it. It's just regular intellectual property laws that you need to address, but no special virtual asset type regulations or laws that we need to address here. I hope that helps.
That helps a lot. In fact, there's now a question, but it's really more common. Listening to you, Julian, on the legal perspective, you put this whole thing, if you can even think of it as a security, or what you do essentially is a form of intermediation. The paradigm shift from the analog world to the NFT world, the digital world, isn't that big. So essentially, you're letting out the air out of some of the hype, through your legal perspective. It was here as a question, but it's really sort of more of a comment.
And that's a great comment. That's a great comment. I actually heard this particular comment from from a friend before. He told me that when you go into the NFT space, you need to try and sell rubbish, because rubbish can reach incredible heights in terms of value, right? For example, if you try to sell something of real value in the real world, let's say, for example, I try to create a DOT or NFT of Pascal's watch. Nobody will pay $23.7 million for his watch, because you have a comparison in the real world as to what the value of that watch is, right? But if you create something that's completely valueless in this world, now you can allow the market to decide what their value is. And that's the irony of it all. And that's why I keep emphasizing earlier, we could have really jumped into the whole entire Web3 experience at the initial phase and made a lot of money by selling a lot of stuff, by creating all of the hype and speculation. But we chose not to. And because we chose not to, we will never be able to take advantage of the kind of value creation that you've just mentioned. But we think that we're on the right path, because at the end of the day, when the tide recedes, as Warren Buffett always says, right, you will know who is standing around on the beach without his trunks. So I think we like to think that we are really very, very concerned about the long-term prospects of the technology and the long-term prospects of our companies. I think that's the most important message I want to deliver.
Yeah. I think that's a very important message. Yes. Thank you, Emma. Do you have any comment on this?
No.
Okay, very good, very good. We are already close to the end of this very, very brief and exciting encounter. What I wanted to know is first whether you see what we have discussed in similar ways to what I have understood now. There's a lot of innovation going on with regards to the technology. We have new technology that is extremely promising. But the social world, the legal world, needs to catch up with this a little bit. And so your interventions, they seem to suggest that there's one way of trying to make NFTs and the Metaverse compatible with existing laws, so that the NFTs and the digital assets contain what they need to contain to be accepted as legally binding tokens that convey intellectual property. And the other way is maybe more exciting for many retail investors, going for the exciting NFTs or the exciting investment opportunities that are out there, and acquire something and then hope for some court decision to years later determine whether they actually have the intellectual property or not. So you can, I think, as advice for entrepreneurs going into this and retail investors going into this, make a bet on having given the rights years later in a court decision, or being very, very careful and cautious about what you invest in today, by making it sure that what you buy is compatible with existing regulation currently. I want to close on one very exciting thing that we haven't touched upon. We are having this as an event that spans oceans, that spans country boundaries, and I think this is a wonderful opportunity. We got used to this. We shouldn't forget this. And I liked very much Pascal's point that he is not only talking about watches, analog and digital, but he's thinking about how to make the technology into something that could achieve a solution to one of the grandest challenges that we have, which is maintaining the peace amongst the nations and the populations on this planet. I like that very, very much. I also found that, and then I hand it over to Jesse, our host for today. I also found it fascinating, and it didn't occur to me before, that much of the discussion that we had centered around transparency. And it didn't occur to me how iconic Pascal's watches are in summarizing what we have been discussing. There is a very strong need for greater transparency about this exciting opportunity that this emerging, bubbling technology offers, but we need greater transparency. We need it to be see-through so that retail investors can safely invest, entrepreneurs can bet on the right technologies and inventions that they want to pursue. With this, I really thank you all extremely for your participation, especially Pascal. Thank you very much for connecting the analog with the digital world. Thank you, Julian, for connecting the legal world with the technology. And Emma, above all, thank you very, very much for providing us the foundation, the financial foundation for what is going on that makes us so excited. Jesse, thank you very much for hosting. It's over to you.
And I think
thank you, Carl.
Yes, thank you, Patrick, as well, and Carl, for definitely moderating this panel and for facilitating the question and answer segment as well. I think that was a very rigorous discussion, and we have much to chew on, probably more questions arising after this. So thank you, everyone, for today. And before we close, we actually have a post-event survey that will appreciate it if participants could help us fill in. It should take no more than 3 minutes of your time, and it will go a really long way in helping us improve our next experience for you. So we have also created a field for you to share what else you'd like to see following this event. So for those who are interested in or working in financial services, we have our inaugural Singapore Financial Forum happening just next week from 19 to 20 May. And you can hear from industry leaders on key developments and outlook in fintech, sustainable finance, and wealth management. So register at the link that will also be sent in the chat, or you can see on the screen right now. So once again, on behalf of SGN, IMD Business School, and SG Innovate, thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you soon at our future events.